All right, while people are logging in, welcome to, I believe this is number 5 of our unlocking series that we're doing through this lockdown time that we all have. And I'll do a little introduction about myself for those of you that haven't been on any of them. Sorry. Just doing a little setup here. Okay, so I'm Chuck Skewes. I own 3 Ullman sales lofts down the west coast of North America, from Puerto Vallarta, San Diego, and the Pacific Northwest. And I've had some great successes in racing, and I do a lot of cruising. And I'm in the fortunate position where I get to sail more miles a year than I drive my car. And that's been the case for many years. And if we get out of lockdown, it'll be the same case this year. Takes a little bit of time, set yourself up so you're comfortable. This is interactive. So when you want to ask a question, do reply to all on either platform, either on the freeconferencecall.com or the Zoom. Reply to all so that you are getting to the mediator who's going to ask the questions to me. And grab yourself a nice cocktail or a beverage of your choice, relax, and make this fun for you, because we're doing this for you guys to keep you involved in sailing while we're in this other situation. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started here. What we're going to cover today, we're going to cover performance spinnaker trim, for the racers out there or guys who want a little better performance in cruising, symmetrical spinnakers, asymmetrical spinnakers, cruising spinnakers, which are asymmetrical spinnakers, and I'll kind of go over a little bit of the differentiations in that. And how to unwrap a wrap. This is a big key. This is something that a lot of people don't know. And by the way, just for your information, this is a redo of one of the webinars that we did a week and a half ago, because we could only have 100 people on. A lot of people couldn't log on, and we didn't record it. We're recording tonight. Hopefully the recording holds well, and we're going to have it available for you guys to share with your crew or anybody else. All right. So tips and tricks when we're talking about a symmetrical spinnaker. Now, there's a lot of people that will give you a lot of advice, and I'm one of them. I'm going to give you some advice tonight, but I'm going to use my experience that I see across the board. I get to sail with a lot of different people, so I see a lot of different things that people do, some of them wrong, some of them right. And over the years, I've sailed with some great people, and we've learned some great things about how to trim a spinnaker. So, pole versus the boom. You'll hear people say that they get trimmed on the same plane, like the pole is a continuation of the boom and the boom is a continuation of the pole. That's not true. The main is always out more than the pole is back, and that is always. And I'm going to give you an example. This is what, if they were trimmed in the same plane, this is what you would see. Now, what I see in this picture is that the main is in too tight, because you look at groups like these J70s, if that was the case, the boom would always be on center line, because their bowsprit is always straight out like a long spinnaker, straight forward. So you don't sail downwind with the boom on center line until you're in certain kind of the conditions. So here's the big key. The boom's out more than the pole is back, because the tacking clue of each sail need to be parallel. The pole has nothing to do with the whole process. It just holds the spinnaker out to the side. So here's the tack of the main. Here's the clue of the main. Here's the tack of the spinnaker. Here's the clue of the spinnaker. They're trimmed in the same plane. So think about that when you're going downwind. If you're all the way squared back with the pole and the clue of the spinnaker is all the way forward, the main's all the way out. And you hit a point where they might be trimmed very close to the same plane, but rarely all the way in the same plane. So here's a perfect example of pole height issues. You see this dark red spinnaker closer to you. The clue of the spinnaker is not next to the pole, and this makes the spinnaker unstable, and you can kind of see this by the uneven way the leeches of the spinnaker are flying. If you're off the boat, you have a better view of that, but on the boat you can kind of see that. and they're losing projected area because the Spinnaker's, when the puff comes, the Spinnaker's going up rather than propelling the boat forward. And you look at the white Spinnaker next to it, it's trimmed with the pole against the Spinnaker, and you notice the leech is more fair, and they have more projected area. They're going to accelerate a little faster in the puffs. It's going to be a lot easier to control that Spinnaker too, because it's not going to want to drift from side to side. Here's a look from the front of a couple boats of the same type of boat. And if you look, this light red Spinnaker that's off to the right of your screen, that Spinnaker is too high. It's got the same scenario where the clue is off of the pole and they're losing some projected area. And then if you look at this red, dark red one over to the left of the screen, it's about right. The pole end of the Spinnaker is slightly lower than the free end of the Spinnaker. And look at the shape of the Spinnaker. The other addition is you get this what we call elephant ass, and that's if the pole's too high, the Spinnaker's too flat, and the leeches try to fly in towards each other, and it causes that big crease in the top of the Spinnaker. That is a sign that your pole is flying too high and your Spinnaker's too flat for the conditions or the boat that you're sailing. All right, so here's a picture of a Spinnaker in pretty good trim. You can see the pole end slightly lower than the other end, and that the main is out further than that pole is squared back. Here's a great picture. You can see that the main is all the way out, the pole's squared pretty far back. They have the pole a little bit lower, projecting it down, and having ideal trim. This is one of my favorite pictures because they are in perfect trim on that Spinnaker right now. So asymmetrical Spinnakers, we're going to kind of go over the basis of asymmetrical Spinnakers. Now, all cruising Spinnakers, we'll wait for the slide to change here. All cruising Spinnakers are asymmetrical Spinnakers for the most part. I mean, some people sail with symmetrical Spinnakers, but asymmetrical Spinnakers and cruising Spinnakers are basically the same thing. They started in high-performance skiffs, went into cruising before they went into general racing, and it's a very efficient shape where we build the front of the sail to always be the front of the sail and the back of the sail always to be the back of the sail, so that we make a much more efficient shape of sail versus a symmetrical Spinnaker where one leech has to be a luff and one luff has to be a leech. They have to go back and forth. And the way I've explained this in the past is if you had a Genoa and you had to flip it leech to luff on the other tack, think of how slow that sail would be. So that's a perfect example of why asymmetrical Spinnakers are so popular and so good. And when we race across the ocean, when we do these Hawaii races, there's almost zero symmetrical Spinnakers left out on the race course. So to set a cruising Spinnaker, you don't want to be going dead downwind. I have these arrows as the direction the wind should be coming from, and it's not quite the best angle to see, but you want to have the wind either abeam or behind the beam slightly off the stern quarter. And here's a little better diagram of the direction. That line up in the top of the screen is the Spinnaker, and that's the boom. The reason for that is when you set the Spinnaker, you want it to be blown away from the boat, and you want it to have air because you don't want it to have a leeward collapse. And I'm going to go into leeward collapses in a bit. You don't want it to be blanketed behind the main when you set it or take it down unless you're in very, very windy conditions. So when you're setting a Spinnaker with an ATN sock, and by the way, that's the only sock I recommend that you purchase are ATN socks. They're by far the best. And you want to have that wind off the beam or off the quarter. You can see the picture to the right here of the purple Spinnaker. That is a perfect scenario for setting and collapsing that Spinnaker. I have another set of pictures here of somebody collapsing the Spinnaker, and the Spinnaker's full because you don't want to sail downwind and have the Spinnaker collapse before you start bringing that sock down. And that's a good trip for cruisers. So how low can you sail? I get this question all the time. I don't get it with just racers. I get it with cruisers. Most cruising Spinnakers and almost all A2s are built for shapes to sail 130 to 170 true wind angle. Now, That depends on the sea state and the wind velocity. Obviously, the more wind, the lower you can sail. And if it's very choppy, you can't sail quite as low because the lower you sail, the less stable the spinnaker gets. So easing the tack line to sail lower. If it goes up or slightly to weather, you can ease it up as much as 4 feet. Your spinnaker is going to get less stable. We talked about it's the same thing with the symmetrical spinnaker. As it goes up, it's going to get flatter, so it's less stable. On cruising boats, that's a little risky because you don't have an active trimmer and necessarily an active helmsman. You're using the autopilot or something. But racing, when you have a full crew and you're heeling the boat to weather, you can let that up, and it allows the luff to rotate more to weather. It gives it more slack, and you can sail lower angles. But it is less stable. So if it goes straight up or to windward, ease it as much as 4 feet. If it goes to leeward, keep it down. Keep it stable and keep it lower down to the tack, if not all the way down. So here's a picture of easing the tack line on a J105, for instance, which is a very common boat to do it because it doesn't plane that easy, and so they sail as low as they can. And these guys have worked the performance out in the boats because it's a one design class. They've worked pretty hard at getting a little edge on their competition. You can see this tack's up about 3 feet. They're trying to sink as low as possible. Mains out. That's a perfect example. And here's an example of when you wouldn't want to be easing that tack line off anymore because that tack is now swinging to leeward. That's not a J105. That's another boat, but this is reaching higher than the ideal conditions for having the tack that high on this boat. Okay, so how much wind can I or should I fly a spinnaker in? Well, it greatly has to do with the amount of experience you have and the spinnakers that you have in your inventory. There's most cruising spinnakers are 1.5 ounce. You can carry them as high as 25 knots or even higher, but when things go wrong, they go wrong much faster, and in that much wind, you're not gaining much speed because you got a heavy displacement boat. Now, on a racing boat, we generally change out of the A2 at 20 knots, at 22 true, because the boat gets going, and so there's not as much pressure in the spinnaker. And so here's a little chart that we have often that we supply to you, and I'm going to do a whole webinar on this next Tuesday. So don't have to take pictures of your screen and learn all about what this is. But basically, the designation of sails, and you hear this all the time, is A1, A4, S1. The A stands for asymmetrical. The S stands for symmetrical. That's all there is to it. Even numbers are running numbers, and odd numbers are reaching sails. So even numbers 2, 4 are running. 2 is the light air. The lower the number, the lighter the air. 1 is a light air reaching sail. 3 is a heavy air reaching sail. 2 is a light air running sail. 4 is a heavy air running sail. It's that simple. It's just the higher the number, the higher the wind range. Even numbers are running, odd numbers are reaching. And we're going to do a whole webinar on the wind velocities that you select for this and what each of these sails, how they came about, and what they really are. Okay, we have a question here.
Not a question. I'm getting some feedback. If you move a little closer to the microphone.
Okay.
Is that
so
okay?
the noise is I just didn't want my face all the way in front of you guys. So anyway, we're going to go to a lot of people talk about sailing wing on wing, and I get this especially when I sail to a cruiser. Is they go, hey, can we go wing on wing? And I said, well, you can, but the sail's not very stable because the clew's way out there, unsupported, all the way out to the one side of the boat. And just like I was talking about with asymmetrical spinnakers, the luff is designed to be the luff and the leech is designed to be the leech. When you go wing on wing, you're flying them opposite of the way they're designed, so they're less efficient, less stable. And so now you say, oh, I'll put a pole out there. Well, you're kind of ruining the whole reason you go cruising for simple life and having a good time with you have all that hardware. So they're designed to fly without a pole, and I highly recommend flying them without a pole. So Wing on wing with asymmetrical. Sail's unstable. It's easy to get a wrap because you're sailing with the leech as the luff, because the wind flows the opposite direction as it's designed. And most likely you're not sailing on efficient polars. And I'm going to go into, I have some slides here where we're going to talk about how polars are developed and why they are developed. So trimming all spinnakers is very similar. And I talked about that, raising the tack up or down based off of how stable the spinnaker is and where it wanted to fly. And the other thing that's the same is you ease the spinnaker until you get a little curl in the luff, 1 to 2 panels, and you pull it back in, and you do that consistently. If the driver of the boat turns down a little bit, you're obviously going to ease out more. He turns up a little bit to dodge kelp or log, it's going to pull it in. The big difference between asymmetricals and symmetrical spinnakers when you're trimming like this is that asymmetricals take much less sheet movement to do the same job. And that's because they're more efficient. It's just our clues are more lined up in line with the direction that it needs to be pulled. The luff is more forgiving because it was built to be a luff. The same thing, 1 to 2 panels of curl. Okay, tips for good trim. If it's too easy to trim, like the person can just keep easing the sheet out, and it doesn't seem to want to curl, and it just keeps going out for the boat, bring the pole back or raise the pole. Make it a little bit more difficult. That means that you're in a little bit too conservative mode if you're racing. If it's too hard to trim, let the pole forward or lower the pole. Those are tips for good trim, very simple techniques. And when in doubt, let it out. Over-trimmed spinnakers are slow, and it's more likely that you're going to have a leeward collapse. And err on curling it too much. It's not ideal to have 4 or 5 panels of curl, but it's better than it being over-trimmed. And adjust the pole height or tack to make it easier or harder to trim, like I talked about in the previous slide. And if the sail collapses completely, which it's going to happen to everybody that flies a spinnaker at one point, and probably every time you fly the spinnaker is going to happen at one point, is you're going to take a ton of sheet to pull it back in, immediately ease it back out. And we often put, on boats I race on, we often put a piece of tape that sits in your hand or by a winch so that when you ease it back out, you know where to stop easing it so you don't re-collapse the spinnaker. So downwind VMG. VMG stands for velocity made good. So the term would be is if you're starting here and need to go here, it might be faster to go at angles to get to this point than it is to go straight downwind because your boat speed is much greater even though your distance is greater. So velocity made good is kind of what we work on when we're trying to go dead downwind. And it's often faster to sail more distance, almost always faster to sail more distance unless the wind is way up. And so we call this a polar performance. Like your boat has polars and it's going to tell you what the best angle to sail is in those conditions. You can either purchase those, I believe, from U.S. Sailing or talk to somebody or just grab some from a similar type boat and they're going to be close enough for you to start with and then you adjust them as time goes on. So sailing downwind is like riding a bike with one speed, like a single speed bike, up a hill. The lighter the air, the steeper the hill. It's a very similar physics to it, is that you only have so much power and you got to get to the destination. And so in light air, it's like going up a steep hill. So in light air, you have to sail really steep angles to keep the spinnaker full and to keep the boat moving. And one of the advantages in this is if you're moving fast, you can fall off as soon as you get a puff and make much better VMG towards your mark. If you let the boat stop by trying to sail too low and the puff comes, all that energy is used in trying to accelerate your boat and you don't make as much distance down to your goal. So light air, you have to do very back and forth lines, more horizontal. As the medium air goes, those angles change. This is what you see a lot in racing where you're trading jibe angles with people on a nice day out there. And then in heavy air, you're just aiming at your destination and going because your boat is not going to go any faster if you heat up. Unless you have a boat that just really planes or the new foiling boats, you know, but most boats, you're just going to head straight downwind when the pressure's up. So developing these polars, now if you're not racing at a really high level, you just need a couple numbers. And it's better to sail to numbers that are wrong than to not sail to numbers at all. Meaning, if it's blowing 8 knots and you're doing 5.9 and the wind blows to 10, you're better off falling off and staying down and holding that, now going up to the 6.4, and the apparent wind angle is going to move aft. It's better to stay on those numbers than it is to let the wind go or your boat speed go 4 knots down to or up to 8 knots or 3 knots to 6 knots and going back and forth because you're constantly re-accelerating. So it's better to stay at a constant speed even if it's not perfect for your boat, but as time goes you'll develop those numbers. And so this is a great practice when you go out sailing. You just try to not change speed by 0.2 of a knot, especially on a day that has a little bit of puffy conditions. You'll just fall off and the person will ease the spinnaker and you'll try to stay at the same speed. And then as it lightens, you're coming up and they're bringing the spinnaker in. That is really key to very good downwind performance. So there's a couple of tips that you can do to make a great spinnaker trimmer out of your spinnaker trimmer, and using the masthead cups. And what I mean by the masthead cups, I mean this little thing right here that has your wind speed indicator on it. Those things spin faster when there's more breeze, and they spin slower when there's less breeze. They're more sensitive than the spinnaker. So what they tell you, they'll spin fast when you get a puff, they'll spin slow when the wind drops, and they're more sensitive than the feel of the sheet. This way you can communicate with the driver earlier to stay on your numbers. So you look up at that and you want them to stay the same speed. In theory, from the weather mark to the leeward mark or from where you're going to your downwind destination, if those cups stay at the same speed, you're going to have great performance. Because that means you're going down in the puffs and you're coming up in the lulls because you're exposing the apparent wind speed to the boat, that you're keeping it at a constant number. And that's a big key to good performance. Now, you don't want to just stare at the cups. You have to look at the spinnaker and ease the sheet and pull it in, like I said, and watch the curl and make sure the pole height's there so that you use your peripheral vision to do this. So the other thing that the masthead instruments that can tell you without using electronic instruments is that masthead fly. Now, it's going to tell you what your jibe angle is, and it's fairly accurate. So the red arrow here, just coming off the top of the mast on this slide I have up, is to emulate the Windex masthead fly that you see up in the top left-hand corner. If it's coming off just aft the beam, and you've got an asymmetric spinnaker up and you're sailing, and this goes for cruisers or racers or anything, and you see a leeward mark and you don't know whether you're on jibe angle for it or you don't know whether you're going to clear a point if you jibe, follow the plane of that. That's going to be your jibe angle. So that's your jibe angle if you're sailing at the same true wind angle on the opposite jibe. So if you're sailing at 145 on starboard jibe, you jibe over, sail 145 on port jibe, it's going to follow that masthead.
Sorry, so we have some sound issues and we lost you for a bit here.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully, let's do this slide one more time.
Okay, so we're going to back up and do this slide. Which slide are we going back to?
Just, I would say, let's do this one here. Start one more
Okay,
time.
so I was talking about that we're looking down on a boat here, and this red arrow is the masthead fly, and it's going to tells you the apparent wind because the boat's going forward, and the true wind's always going to be further aft of that where that arrow is pointing because of the boat going forward and creating some breeze of its own. So when you jibe, you follow, if you're going to sail at the same angle to the breeze that you are currently sailing on the other jibe, that's going to be your jibe angle. So you can look up at your masthead and follow that angle that goes, and where it is aimed, the opposite of the direction of the point on it is aimed, that's what your heading's going to be on the other jibe. All right, so sailing too low, leeward collapses. You heard me talk about leeward collapses about 3 times already. They're the worst collapse to have in flying a spinnaker. They sound less ominous because when you don't have enough sheet in, it curls back too much, the spinnaker makes quite a bit of noise, or if you sail too high, we've all done that where you're trying to reach around a buoy or something and you round up and it sounds awful. The only thing that happens there is the sail flogs and gets windy. Usually nothing bad happens. But when you sail too low for how much sheet you have in, it gets stuck in the vortex behind the main, that's when it causes raps. It gets less stable and causes raps, and it's generally not faster. So this is what has happened. Many of us have had this. Probably everybody that's raced has at one point had this happen to them. And it's a terrible situation to be in, but I'm going to give you some tips on how to get this undone as fast as possible. So it's caused by the wind going around the backside of the main and causing this vortex. And if you sail too low, the spinnaker gets sucked in that vortex because it's not out in clear air. Now, as soon as it gets wrapped or starts to wrap, immediately jibe the main and sail just as low as you were sailing on your previous jibe. Make the vortex go the other way, and it starts to unwrap. Now, obviously, if you let it get really tight, it's going to be a handful to get it unwrapped. But I've done this in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, and we've always gotten it taken out without having to send somebody up the rig. It's a little sketchy because you jibe the boom, and you've got people up on the deck, and you've got to sail low enough that you may jibe the boom again. So be careful. Stay out of the path of the boom. But if you jibe the boat immediately and sail low, the same situation that caused the problem, you'll see that it'll start unwrapping. All right, it is time for question and answers. I don't know, we have many questions?
No.
We actually don't. Wow, last time we did this, we had lots of questions. So
let's give it a few minutes.
This is our information. These webinars will be on our Facebook page. And hold on. This webinar will be on our Facebook page, all of them. They'll be every Tuesday and Thursday night at 6 p.m. We may change platforms next week. We're talking to some companies right now about changing platforms to make this a little easier because we're using 2 platforms right now, and it's cumbersome on our side, but we're running out of space. Too many people were signing up. It's becoming really popular because you guys don't have anything better to do. And so go to our Facebook page or email us at sd@ullmansales.com, and we can get you informed on when the next webinar is. Okay, we have some questions coming up here.
You can repeat the question. What are your thoughts on furling and ASIN spins?
So the question was, what are my thoughts on furling and ASIN spinnaker? About 8 years ago, they came down with these top-down furlers, and they're a pretty nice thing to have. But most cruising boats either don't have the correct spacing to allow them or don't have low enough stretch halyards for them to work efficiently. We have spent a lot of time selling socks to people that have furlers, and socks are totally trouble-free. Furlers are nice, but you refer to your rigger and talk about your concerns, and then they can rig your boat so that the furler will work. But they're a little tougher to get to work perfectly.
Okay, this is a longer one. So, is the idea about the masthead fly pointing towards the ley line downwind good for a symmetrical as well as an ASIN?
Yeah. So the question was: is that masthead fly jibe angle as good for a symmetrical spinnaker as an asymmetrical spinnaker? And it absolutely is. It doesn't change that geometry of how you sail anyway. It's a great indicator of a jibe angle, and so you can use it for that. Generally, you sail slightly deeper with symmetrical spinnakers, but not always. The modern boats are with the poles that square back are still using asymmetrical spinnakers on them, and they're sailing. It's just jibes are a little more of a handful. But that wind vane jibe angle works regardless. of whether you have asymmetrical or symmetrical spinnaker.
Cool. One more. On an Ullman 30 or similar, do you suggest asym or sim for racing in San Diego?
So the question was, if like an Ullman 30 or similar, do you suggest asymmetrical or symmetrical for racing? Now, my rule on that is if you're doing point-to-point races, I like to use asymmetrical spinnakers because in a straight line, an asymmetrical spinnaker is always faster than a symmetrical spinnaker. And it's for those points I talked about at the beginning, where the luff is always the luff, the leech is always the leech. We design the right twist into it, and the sheeting angle is a little more effective, and everything's better. But an asymmetrical spinnaker has to collapse to jibe. So now if your run is only a mile long or 2 miles long and you have to jibe 2 or 3 times, there's 2 or 3 times where the boat's going to slow down. So in a place like San Diego Bay where you're racing in a pretty closed quarter, asymmetrical spinnakers aren't always going to be the case. But then you look at boats like Pendragon and Staghound and Blue Blazes, all the Grand Prix boats have asymmetrical spinnakers and race with them. But that's because their speed potential is so much higher. They benefit more from the asymmetrical spinnaker.
Okay, so there's a few questions, but Bruce Cooper is answering online.
Yeah, we have Ullman team members online. Bruce Cooper, Vince Downroll, and a couple of these guys can answer questions on the chat. So just keep an eye on the chat if you have a question, and you'll get some answers coming through on there as well.
So there is one more here, or a few more, but with asyms, high shoulder break, should you raise the tack?
So it's the same rule whether it's a high shoulder or not. And if that line goes straight up when you ease the tack, it's faster. And the high shoulder doesn't really come into play, but where you're going to see is you're going to get that crease in the top, that thing I talked about, elephant ass. You might start getting that a little bit because the spinnaker is going to get flatter as it goes up. When you pull leeches down on a spinnaker, it gets rounder and more full, I guess is the words I'm looking for. And as you let everything up, it gets flatter. And if it gets too flat, it's going to be unstable and start getting that creasing. So it's not really critical whether it's a big shoulder or not. Faster boats don't have to ease it up as much because they're sailing hotter angles.
Another one, and you can repeat it. So tell me the function use of the leading edge chevrons on asyms. Anything we should be aware of? So
the question was, what's the function of the leading edge chevrons on asymmetrical spinnakers? Those are just as a way to see the curl better, especially in twilight hours where it's very hard to see the spinnaker. We put those on. You can also calibrate how much it's curling back a little easier because the V gets a little wider. And we put glow stripes on them for night sailing. So if that sails up during the daylight hours, it glows and we can see those same chevrons at night.
Okay, more. You will have to repeat it. With a fixed sprit boat, like an R46, do you ever rotate the luff to weather like slower J105? So
the question was on a big, fast sprit boat, kind of a Class A style boat, like a TP52 or RC44, I think is what the other was. Do you ever rotate the kite to weather and sail slow and low? You would only do that for a tactical advantage because boats that have that speed potential are so much faster sailing at their 140 true wind angle than they would be by ever trying to go down to 180. Now, the exception to that is in puffy conditions where the puffs are really small moving down a bay. A lot of times there's a benefit if you're at the base of that puff to sail lower because you stay in this heavier wind longer. Because sailing downwind, it's about wind velocity almost more than wind direction because you accelerate so much faster and the angle changes. When you're going upwind, you get hit by a puff, your angle changes 1 or 2 degrees. It can change 20, 30 degrees going downwind. So pressure rules downwind, shifts rule upwind.
Okay, we're getting more, so we got a few more minutes.
Got a few more minutes, and we're going to time out on the Zoom broadcast, but we got a few more minutes.
So this is a good one. I never thought I would ask this, but how can you prevent elephant butt on an ASIM? Is it with twingers?
So how do you prevent elephant butt or elephant ass? Let's talk about that in that creasing in the middle on an ASIM. How do you prevent that creasing on an ASIM in the top? You can use twingers, but I'm not a huge fan of over twinging down an asymmetrical spinnaker because it also pulls the clue in towards the backside of the mane. You really want, the best thing to do would be to try to rotate the rig back slightly if you could with backstay maybe if that you were having that problem, or just make sure you're 100% hoisted and all the way down on the tack. That's probably your best bet.
Cool. Okay. What is the PHRF hit for ASIM?
Well, PHRF is, that's what the PHRF hit for ASIMs is. In Southern California, there is no penalty for asymmetrical spinnakers if they meet the same square footage rule as the symmetrical spinnakers, and there's a couple other rules that do it. Now, PHRF is different in every single venue you sail, so you have to consult your local PHRF. It's a completely different animal, absolutely everywhere. It's not consistent nationwide or worldwide.
Okay, 2 more questions, then we're good here. ASIM, should we be carrying a slide hook to windward to move the center of the pressure forward, or is a straight luff faster on an ASIM?
So the question was, should we be carrying a little bit of a hook to weather to
to move the center of pressure forward?
To move the center of pressure forward.
Or is a straight luff faster?
It depends. It greatly depends on the speed potential of your boat. The slower the boat, the more rounded the luff is going to be on your boat. The more you should sail with the luff rounded. On faster boats, you go straighter luff. You look at boats that have really high speed potential, like the AC boats, for instance. They go so fast they don't use an ASIM. They use a little jib. And catamarans use something that's much similar to a jib than a spinnaker. It's very straight luff. And then you get on a boat like a 105 where the speed potential isn't nearly that. It's a very round luff. We try to sail quite low, and not only that, we put the weight to the weather and roll it down. All right, so we are out of time, and just feel free to ask any of your questions by email, and we will be here again next Tuesday. Thank you very much for joining, and all you guys have a great night.